We Americans have an endless fascination with police stories. Just look at the popularity over the years of TV cop shows. Some true to life, others pure fiction. Well, there's a police story being told here in New York this week that is so shocking you couldn't make it up. Richard Threlkeld has the story in tonight's Eye on America.
What would you steal?
Money and drugs and guns, whatever was there.
Why were these beatings done?
To show who was in charge. We were in charge, the police.
I wasn't the first person to think of this. It was ongoing.
Every day on the streets of New York, it's cops against criminals, good guys against the bad guys. But as police corruption hearings have revealed this week, some of New York's policemen are the bad guys.
I remember reaching into a box full of cocaine and taking out 2 big handfuls and putting them in my pocket and walking out.
The star witness, Michael Dowd, a police officer for 10 years before he was convicted on drug and racketeering charges. He and a handful of fellow officers turned into common criminals, he said, while his superiors looked the other way.
There was times when I was shocked that I got away with so many of these things.
What did he get away with? Burglary, for one thing.
This is probably the most embarrassing thing I ever did as a police officer.
While investigating a burglary, he had the victim's daughter call her mother to ask if she had any valuables hidden in the house.
So she called her mother, and her mother told her where the money was hidden, and I found it for her. But she never got it.
Eventually, Michael Dowd got rich. A fancy sports car, fancy clothes, 4 homes.
How much money were you making a week through your narcotics activities?
Anywhere between $4,000 and $5,000.
How much money were you making a week from your New York City paycheck?
About 400.
What protected him, Dowd said, was the so-called blue wall of silence. Cops don't snitch on other cops, even if they're bad cops. He learned that, he said, as a recruit at the police academy. Us against them.
When you say us against them, who is the us, Mr. Dowd?
Us is the police officers, and them is the public.
Dowd wasn't the only witness. Bernard Colley's a former cop now in prison on drug charges. They called him the mechanic because he beat people up, innocent people, too.
How many individuals do you think you administered beatings to in the 46th precinct?
Approximately 300 to 400 people.
Mr. Coley, weren't you ever afraid of getting caught at doing this?
No, who's going to catch us? We're the police.
Why was all this allowed to happen? Sergeant Joseph Trimboli, a police investigator who for years tried unsuccessfully to bring some of the bad cops to justice, says that police brass looked the other way.
There was a lack of resolve to go after these individuals, and that it would be a tremendous embarrassment to the New York City Police Department.
Former Officer Colley put it more simply.
Were you ever afraid that one of your fellow officers might turn you in?
Never.
Why not?
Because it was the blue wall of silence. Cops don't tell on cops.
Police officials insist that the troubles this time are not nearly so serious nor pervasive as corruption scandals in the past, that Dowd and the others are just exceptions to the rule. Perhaps, but after a week of these hearings, New Yorkers are wondering just how exceptional those bad cops really are. In New York, I'm Richard Threlkeld for Eye on America.
Would you also steal drugs from these drug dealers, Mr. Dowd?
Yes.
Would the other officers steal drugs from the drug dealers as well?
Yes. I don't know what they did with it, all of them, but, you know, some of them even gave it to us.
Some people have said that this kind of corruption is a matter of opportunity, but what you seem to be saying is that this was premeditated and planned. Is that your experience?
It was a daily basis. It was something that happened daily. It was planned. I don't know if you had to plan that. It was just regular, everyday patrol.
You said you set goals in the amount of money that you wanted to make, correct?
Correct.
That you would pick out certain locations to hit, correct?
Yes.
That you would go to a clandestine location known as the pool to plan it. So what you're talking about here is a number of officers planning how to use the narcotics trade to steal from the narcotics trade for their own personal gain.
Yeah, that's planning. Yeah.
As your time in the 75th Precinct continued, did you find other opportunities as well besides shaking down drug dealers for making money off the job?
I found a lot of ways to make money.
What about with regard to what you called radio runs, call for service? Were they opportunities for corruption for you?
Yes. There was plenty of opportunities. The radio runs were the ones that would give me the tips on where to go and where not to go.
Well, how do you mean that, sir?
Well, by the best way to do, I guess I'm going to teach everybody how to make money here. The best way to make,
Mr. Dowd.
huh?
Let's hope not. Let's just get
No,
to the
that's
truth.
I'm embarrassed by saying a lot of these things. It's not that simple, you know. The best way I would pick a radio run is by the infrequency of the least probability of it being called. Maybe you'll get a call 10 times a day. You'll get the same location or the same address. And you know it's really not a good call to go on to make money. Not only has it been hit 3 times already that day, but also it's played out and it's a good chance you're going to get set up.
Okay, let me stop you there for a moment, Mr. Dowd. So what you're saying is, as your experience as a police officer grew, you would also get a better sense or a better smell for corruption opportunities.
Certainly.
Okay. Why don't you give us an example of how now, as you've become an experienced corrupt cop, you knew what opportunities on radio runs might be lucrative?
I'll give you a case scenario, if that's sufficient.
Please.
I have an incident where we'll get a call for shots fired at a certain address, Pine Street, say, off the corner of Linden Boulevard. It's a very quiet area. Nothing goes on down there. You don't often get even a fake call down there, never mind a call for, say, someone shot. So you know, your experience tells you that this is probably a good call. The sad thing is that someone's probably shot and someone's probably dead. But the other thing in the back of your mind, which was my mind at the time, was that there's probably a reason this person was shot, and it's probably over money and drugs. And
So?
it's just so happened that when your experience tells you these things, and you know.
So when you get a location that is a rare location over the radio, what do you do? Even if it's not your sector, do you go there?
Well, if I wanted money that day, yes.
Okay, so what would happen? Do you have an example? Did that ever occur in your experience?
Yes. I'll give you the example on Pine Street. There was a man shot through the peephole of his door. Obviously, he was shot by a friend because the door was unlocked. And we arrived at the location. Mind you, if I describe these things, it's not so easy. They're hectic. People are running around. I'm walking into this building with guy dead on the floor here, gunfire going off upstairs, doors and drawers and cabinets and everything opening and closing, and in my warped mind I'm saying they're hiding the drugs. I'm not worried so much about the guns, and I'm worried about, oh shit, they're hiding the drugs or the money.
In other words, you're concerned that you might not find drugs and money there.
I knew they were hiding it. I was getting a little concerned, but that there was, I knew there was big weapons in the house, so I had to step back a little. That's just the way it was.
So what happened in that incident?
Well, after I convinced the people upstairs that I was the police and I wasn't going to hurt them, they came to the stairwell. You got a picture. It's a long climbing stairs, and they're upstairs, and I don't know what's up there, and you're scared. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the drugs and the money. I had to get up there. Sure enough, I got up there and I found it. I found another table, almost like these things. These tables are perfect for them. Another table like this with drugs on it and empty crack vials, thousands and thousands of empty crack vials. So I knew I was on a spot. So what I did was I had my partner watch the door, because now you got to realize it's a hectic scene. There's people dead. There's a lot of cops coming and going. So I had my partner watch the door while I searched this room. Well, he got a little excited. He came in the room with me, and we had another cop outside watch the door. And meanwhile, there's 15 cops in and out of the place. My partner found a gun, and he's a gun buff, so he wanted to take the gun. I told him, put the gun down. We got drugs over here, and drugs is, you can buy 10 times the guns than you can with the drug money. So we took a bag of drugs out of the house.
And did you manage to resell that?
Yeah.
What was your score on that particular incident, Mr. Dowd?
I can't be accurate with that. I'd say $1,200. I don't know.
Sorry?
Maybe $1,200.
Did there come a time, Mr. Dowd, where you made even bigger scores than that? Did your ambitions increase?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, how that developed?
Well, I had another job where I came across a half a kilo of cocaine.
Now, how did you come across that? Was that a radio run?
No, that was a pickup. It was a robbery in the street. I picked up the job. I went to a house. I followed the kid in. I knocked on the door. The young kid let me in, and my partner, and we went through the house, and we were able to determine it was a drug house.
How did you determine it was a drug house?
The looks. The house was too well furnished. Too much money was spent inside the house.
And that sort of set off your instincts?
Immediately.
So what did you do?
Well, again, a lot of cops show up because it was a pickup of a robbery, guns were involved, you know, cops are trying to help each other out, and they come, they show up, and I pushed the collar off on some young cops, and I've continued to search the house.
And when you say you pushed the collar off on some young cops, can you explain what you mean by that phrase?
Well, push the collar. Young guys showed up, it's a gun collar, they're excited. You want a gun collar, kid? Yes.
So they're happy to get
They're happy
the
to
arrest.
take it. I'm happy to get rid of it because I don't want to go through central booking and go through all the paperwork, and I know there's something else going on here, so I'm more interested in that.
So they take the arrest and leave, and then you and your partner do what?
Search the house.
What do you eventually find?
We found a locked suitcase. I'll tell you how it happened. I find a locked suitcase downstairs in the basement behind something like this, drapes. So I take the suitcase out from behind, and I shake it, and actually I'm praying it's money because it's heavy, but it turns out we couldn't open the briefcase. So my partner ran to the back and got a hacksaw in the guy's workroom. And I hacksawed the box open, the briefcase open, and I pulled out a half a kilo of cocaine.
What'd you do with the cocaine?
Well, I slipped it under my jacket, and I walked out of the house, only to be confronted by the owner, who got me nervous. I felt like I was stealing his drugs. I might get in trouble, I don't know.
Was there ever a complaint made about that, Mr. Dowd? Any complaint at all in that incident?
No.
Were you able to sell the cocaine?
Yes.
Was that through yourself, your own efforts, or your partner's efforts?
My partner took it.
What was the score, so to speak, on that sale of drugs?
$14,000.
Mr. Dowd, how much money would you estimate in your first 2 or 3 years in the 75th Precinct you were making from your illicit activities, from scores, shaking down drug dealers, and the rest?
In the early years?
Yes, sir. Before 1986.
I don't know, 500 to 1,000 a week, on the average.
Mr. Dowd, a few minutes ago, you said there are other ways to make money in addition to money off drug dealers. Would you care to tell us some of the other ways that you're able to make money on the job?
Well, I had said that making money on the job means often not spending money.
I know you said that some time ago, but a few minutes ago, when you were saying how you were making money off drug dealers, you also said there were other ways to make money. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. There are other ways, like burglaries.
Or did you actually engage in burglaries?
Yes.
Will you tell us some of the circumstances, please?
Well, there'd be a burglary. Actually, I would get called to a burglarized house. And if you want me to give you an instance, I'll give you an instance on how it happened. This is probably the most embarrassing thing I ever did as a police officer. I was called to a burglary in progress. The woman that was at the home was a young lady in her early 20s. She is nervous to go in her home, so we accompanied her into the home and we checked the place out. And there's a lot more to it before I just say this. I had gotten a new partner at the time, and I had to prove to him that I was good. So in order to prove to him that I was good, I had to give him some reason to think that to know that I was good. So what I had done was I told the woman, I said, listen, we don't know if they took anything from your house or not, because where's your mother? She's at work. So the mother, I told her, why don't you call your mother at work and tell her, and ask her if she has anything hidden in the house that might be missing. So she called her mother, and her mother told her where the money was hidden, and I found it for her. But she never got it.
You found it and you took it?
Yeah.
What sum of money was that approximately?
I'm sorry?
What amount of money was that?
That was a small amount at the time. It was like $600, $800.
Mr. Dowd, I'd like to just go back for a moment to the time in which you were engaging, as you said before, in making scores at radio runs and shaking down drug dealers in your first years at the precinct, because I understand that incident happened a little bit later on, as you explained to the chairman.
Right.
However, the chairman makes a good point. Besides the drug trade in your first years in the 75th precinct, were there other ways that you would make money off the job with regard to, let's say, business owners?
Well, I personally didn't get paid from any business owners.
What about getting gifts?
Yes.
How would that happen, Mr. Dowd? How would you become involved with the business owners, people in the community, in order to engage in that kind of corruption?
Well, it's everybody likes to have a police officer in his store, in and out of his store during the course of a day. They feel safe, and the neighborhood people see cops in and out of there, so they're less likely to stick them up or bother them or rob them when they leave.
And so what happens?
So they entice you by making a nice offers to you, whatever it might be. If it's a clothing factory, they offer you clothes. If it's a food place, they give you free food. So
and you would take the clothing and the food as from the business owners?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Dowd, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the commission has heard evidence before your appearance here that police officers on occasion used informants in order to assist them in identifying locations that they might hit. Was that true in your experience as well?
Yes.
How would that take place in your experience, Mr. Dowd?
How would that take place?
Yes.
Well, you speak to a local drug dealer or a drug user, or somebody who maybe they're tired of being shaken down and they want you to leave them alone, so they give you other information. Or you happen to catch them with a couple of pieces of narcotics on them, and it's not worth the arrest and it's not worth taking. Usually you let them go.
Has that happened to you? Did you use informants to hit drug spots?
Yes.
Do you recall any particular example? I'm thinking of a bodega on the corner of Shepherd Avenue.
Yes.
How did that take place? How did you use the informant to identify a location for corruption?
Well, that was back in 1985 now. Again, I've lost a little...
As I said, I wanted to go back to that time period. In your
well, what happened then was my partner, who was really... He was into coke a lot at the time, and maybe I didn't know it. And we found this guy who had actually come out of the spot, which was a bodega, and he had drugs on him, and he told us where he got it and how he got it. So we planned for the following day to go back there and hit the spot with him. What we had was we told him to go in, buy his piece, and then come out. And if they had, we would go in and hit the store ourselves in uniform.
And did you do that?
Yes.
Did the people in that store make a complaint against you and your partner?
I believe someone tried to.
You say tried to. What happened, based on your knowledge?
Well, we took a gun and some drugs, and one of the women, there was a woman who, she was crazy. She went to the precinct to tell the police that I took her gun.
What happened when she got to the station?
I don't know that she ever made it to the desk. I don't know. I don't even know. Or maybe they thought she was crazy.
Was it your attitude that your supervisors would protect you with regard to allegations of corruption that came in about you in these early years?
Yes. They deflected a lot of it.
Would they tell you about that?
Well, there were instances where they let it be known.
Let it be known that what?
That we were getting some complaints, or that we may be being watched.
And would that assist you in covering up or concealing your corruption?
It would help us either change our patterns or stop.
Did they ever tell you to cut it out?
Did anyone ever tell me to stop? No.
Mr. Dowd, did there come a time in 1986 that you were transferred out of the 75th Precinct?
Yes.
Based on your conversations with police officers in that precinct and with supervisors, how many police officers would you say knew about the corruption that you and your crew were engaging in at the time?
The whole precinct.
Were your supervisors, like the integrity control officer and the commanding officer, aware of this?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Well, my partner happened to be friendly with the ICO and the integrity control officer, and he had made mention that there was someone made a complaint, and just watch yourselves. And then shortly thereafter, I was called in by the inspector to drive him to a borough meeting. And my partner and I drove him down to the meeting, and it just seemed very odd. You know, cops have a sixth sense about things. They know when something's up, and I knew something was up. So did my partner. We dropped the inspector off at the borough meeting. He said it was an emergency borough meeting, and these things don't happen.
The inspector being the commanding officer of the 75th Precinct?
Yes. So after we dropped him off, we went back, and he called for us to come back and pick him up about 2 hours later. Well, when we picked him up, we got him in the car, and my driving scared the heck out of him, but other than that, he had the chance to say to me and my partner, why don't you put a 57 in? 57 is a transfer form from one precinct to another. So he didn't let us say a word. He just said, I think you two guys are burnt out, and the ghetto's got the best of you. It's time to move on. So that was pretty subtle. That was a pretty subtle hint right there.
So he asked you to get yourself transferred out of his command?
Yes.
And you were pretty much, based on your knowledge, known to be a pretty serious discipline problem at that time?
I don't think that would be totally accurate, but it would. I was a problem, yeah. I guess I can't cover it any longer. I was a problem.
Did you eventually get transferred out of the 75th Precinct in 1986?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd, I'd like to stop you there a moment. During this time, were there rumors circulating around your command about a major investigation into police corruption?
Yes.
And that eventually, the result...
It was about the 77th Precinct.
Was about the 77th Precinct?
Yes.
Did you follow the results of the 77 precinct case, you and your fellow officers?
Yes.
Were you very interested in what was going on there?
Well, I was happy it wasn't us.
Do you know that 13 police officers were arrested and indicted as a result of that investigation?
Yes.
Would you say, based on your first-hand knowledge, that the 75th precinct was as infested with corruption among cops as the 77 precinct was at that time?
Without a doubt.
Mr. Dowd, for all of the time that you were in the 75th precinct up until 1986 before your transfer, and all the acts of corruption which you've described for us in crimes, did you ever once receive any discipline whatsoever before to 1986?
I don't think so.
While you were there, Mr. Dowd, at the 75th precinct, can you hear me?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about the motivation for what you were doing? In other words, was it because you needed the money? Was it because it was a thrill for you and your partner to do this? What were you thinking?
Well, there was it's a combination of basically what you said. It was a thrill. Let me back up for 1 second. The original reasons a lot of these things are done is not to be so corrupt. In the beginning, you start out saying, you know, you're angry that the drug dealers basically run the street, and you're angry that you have no dent into what they're doing. So in the beginning, you start, well, what the heck, if we arrest them, we get a complaint by our CO or our sergeant that, what'd you do? You took 2 crack vials off the street, you cost the city 16 hours overtime, what's going on here? So, you know, it's that attitude, and then next day you won't get the same assignment. You'll be on a foot post in the weeds by the Bell Parkway. So this is how it begins, and this is how it began with us. And then the negative reinforcement constantly, you know, you say, well, what the heck, make them pay a tax. Make the drug dealers pay a tax. I mean, don't get me wrong, I didn't go there intending to rob drug dealers. I made drug arrests when I first got there. But very, very quickly you turned off to this by the department itself. If anybody tells you any different, they're lying.
Thanks.
Mr. Dowd, when you were transferred out of the 75th precinct, what detail were you put in then in May of 1986?
I was put in the Coney Island detail.
What is the Coney Island detail?
The Coney Island detail is basically you walk along the boardwalk for the summer.
Is it a place where police officers who are known as discipline problems go to?
We call it the dumping. We get dumped there from the precinct. It's not a favorable assignment for cops in Brooklyn because they got to travel to the end of Brooklyn, and it adds that much more travel time to their assignment, to their day.
After your conversation with the inspector, the commanding officer of the 75th precinct, were you thereafter assigned with your partner to the Coney Island detail?
Yes, and a few others.
And a few others from the 75th precinct?
Yes.
What was your experience there, sir?
Coney Island. Well, it was a lot of fun.
Well, can you tell us what you mean by fun?
Oh, it was fun. It was one drunk day after another.
Did you do any police work whatsoever while you were there?
You know, what's police work? Police work standing out and making sure you're seen visibly.
And you were there day after day in uniform, drunk?
Most of the time.
Did you have supervisors in the Coney Island detail? Sergeants and lieutenants?
Yes.
Were you observed by them in that kind of condition?
Yes.
What was the reaction or the consequences of that?
Well, there was no consequences. I mean, one time we were tipped off that we were getting caught in someone made a complaint that the cops were hanging out in the bar. So the lieutenant told us at roll call one day, I know it's none of you guys, but someone made a complaint that the cops are hanging out in a bar in uniform. So after the beads of sweat went away on my brow, I didn't go back there.
What happened to your partner during the Coney Island detail?
He quit.
He resigned?
Yeah, he resigned.
Why did he resign?
Because of the noise coming out from the 7/7 investigation, and because he had a feeling that one day he might get arrested.
Did you have any dangerous experiences while you were out in Coney Island, while you were intoxicated, as you described?
Yes.
Tell the commissioners what that was.
Well, I was very, very, very drunk, so even that's a little cloudy, the memory of it. All I remember was we were coming back to the precinct, and we were in a police blazer, and they had just stopped off and picked up some Dunkin' Donuts. Strange. And I usually don't eat Dunkin' Donuts. And I ate it, and I threw up all over the inside the car because I was so drunk that they were trying to sober me up is what they were doing. When we got back in front of the precinct, a crazed guy came to the precinct with a toy gun in his hand and pointed it at about 40 cops. Miraculously, he didn't get shot. He threw the gun down and it broke in half. And I was so drunk, I was in the car and I was pointing the gun through the window of the Jeep. And ranting and raving in my drunk stupor. I ended up assisting in cuffing him. Don't ask me how I got there. I probably flew. And then I ended up carrying him back into the assisting him back into the precinct with the lieutenant in tow. I didn't know the lieutenant was there. I couldn't see.
Did you ever receive from that lieutenant any sort of discipline for being drunk and unholstering your firearm while you were in that condition?
No. No.
Firstly, Mr. Dowd, did you ever get any offer of treatment or help at that point in your career?
No.
Even though there were a lot of people, including officers who senior officers, who observed your condition?
Mr. Chairman, with the Commission's permission, we'd like to take a 5-minute recess at this point.
Certainly, we'll recess for 5 minutes. We'll return at 11:05. All know this. Ms. Leslie Kornfeld, Deputy Chief Counsel to the Commission. Ms. Kornfeld, you may proceed.
Yes, Chair. Mr. Dowd, after your summer in Coney Island, when you returned to the 75th Precinct, did you go back expecting to continue business as usual?
No.
Could you tell us what you mean?
Well, when you say go back, you mean to the 75th, right?
That's right.
Okay.
This would be now September of '86.
No, I had a very, well, the 77th precinct was about to break or had already broken. And the real possibility of my own problems being uncovered were, I thought, at hand. And besides the fact that I was newly married and I had a brand new son, I intended on doing the right things.
Doing the right thing. Your attitude obviously didn't last long, Mr. Dowd. Could you tell us what happened?
Well, what happened was, after I got back to the 75th...
Hold on one moment. You please be quiet in the corner there.
After my arrival back to the 75th precinct, I had, I thought, a new attitude, and I was hoping to be able to survive a career as a police officer at this point. And I knew it would be difficult, but I didn't think that it would be as difficult as it turned out to be.
Why was it so difficult?
Because many of the police officers there wouldn't work with me for many reasons, and one of the main reasons was because they couldn't believe that I was still on the job.
Why couldn't they believe that you were still on the job? What do you mean?
Well, I think combined with the hysteria from the 77th precinct and the known activity that myself and all my crew was involved in, being at this point the only one left was really me. Everybody else had either quit the job or was transferred out into different areas.
And that was one of the reasons why people stayed away from you, other cops, when you first returned to the 75th precinct?
Yeah, well, they didn't know why these people were no longer on the job. They thought maybe I had ratted them out or things of that nature.
So in other words, your reputation as a corrupt cop was so well known at that point that people thought the only way you could still be on the job was if you were working with IAD?
Correct.
Did you eventually get a new partner after you returned to the 75th precinct?
Yeah, yes, after a lot of, it was quite a while. It was probably about 8 months. It took me 7 or 8 months to get a new partner, maybe even longer.
Would this new partner have been, who was this new partner?
Kenny Urell.
Did you form a pact with Kenny Urell similar to the pacts that you had formed with previous partners?
Yes, we did. We had the same agreement as the others.
Could you tell us about the agreement that you reached?
Well, it's funny because he did what they call the Dowd test on me, and he went into a bodega and picked up a couple of beers, and he drank them with me, and just to let me know that he was letting his guard down a little bit. And we sat in the car and we agreed after this little toast that we wouldn't hurt each other and that it's time to do some work together.
And by work together, you mean engage in acts of corruption together?
Yes.
Did you come to any agreement about the seriousness of the acts of corruption that you would commit together at this point in your career?
Well, like I had, the hysteria from the 77th precinct had waned now. You're talking about an 8-month period, maybe 9-month period, and then all the hysteria had gone, and the way it was portrayed in the press was basically these guys were being arrested and prosecuted for minimal charges and minor offenses, and we were astounded that I personally and my whole crew never had the same thing happen to them. But we didn't want to take that risk again and go back into the same, what I'll call petty offense type crimes. So we were looking for bigger opportunities to make money.
Could you tell us, during your first few months together, what kind of acts of corruption were you and your partner engaging in before you went into the bigger and better, as you put it, acts of corruption? Were you testing each other out, even with the corruption?
Well, it was the testing period, and that's one of the instances that I alluded to with Mr. Mollen on the burglary at the house, one of my lowest forms of corruption I ever did, where the woman called her mother, and I took the money out of the house.
And you split that money with your partner, is that what you said?
Yes.
And that was a way to show him, to use your phrase, that you were good?
Yeah, well, what had happened was the day before we had missed $11,000 in another house, and he thought I was setting him up. So I had to, I felt desperate to prove to him that I wasn't setting him up, and that's why I did that.
Were there any other acts of corruption that you engaged in during this period where you were testing each other out that you could share with the commissioners?
Yeah, well, there was, like, the one where we were racing to the jobs. Him, together, we knew that the rare jobs were the good ones. And from that one instance where we were able to take the narcotics, the bag full of narcotics out right past the sergeant and put it in the car, that was a good score, and at the time. And
that's the Pine Street example?
Yes.
The day before?
Yes.
You said you were racing to the job. Was it coincidence that you were racing to the job?
No coincidence.
Were you trying to be the first officer on the scene?
Yes, that's why I was racing there.
Why was that?
Because I knew it was going to be a good job. I knew it'd be a money job.
So you could get first dibs?
Yes.
Any other acts during your first few months together that you and your partner committed? Do you recall an incident at Sunnyside?
Yeah. Well, there was an incident where, if I'll describe for the panel with the actual scenario, what happened was my partner and I were in the precinct. It was the beginning of a 4 to 12 tour. A young woman had come up to my partner and told him that they just did a drug raid on this location on Sunnyside, and that the officers that did the raid missed some money that was in the ceiling of the home. So he relayed the message to me, and we discussed that we would go back there that night, right, I'm sorry, we were doing a midnight tour. We weren't doing a 4 to 12. We would go back there and try and get in and see if we can get the money that the detectives missed. And what we did was we called up a guy who had quit the job and asked him to be there with us, and we made him, I guess, like an undercover detective. He put his bogus shield out and his gun, and he went in with us, and we basically did a burglary on duty of this house, looking for the money in the ceiling.
How did you do it? Were you calling Central at any time? What happened?
No, what happened was we pre-arranged that we would just go there and do it. And of course, we were on duty, and we had the radios, so if any call came over, we would be able to cover. And eventually a call did come over.
And what happened?
Well, while we were in the house, someone called 911. Now, we thought we took care of that by knocking on all the doors and telling them the police are here and we're going to go do a search warrant on his house. But one of the individuals must have had the music on too loud, and he didn't hear us knocking on the door, so we assumed no one was home. When we went in, after about 5 minutes in the location, I guess a lot of noise was being made. The guy upstairs must have woke up, and he called. What had happened was he was scared. He thought they were coming into his apartment. He didn't know who it was. So he climbed over the building to the neighbor's house. And he was calling from the neighbor's house. So on the radio, we were asking Central, who's making the complaint? We're 84, we're on the scene. Who's making the complaint? So Central called back the callback, which is a number that she gets, and the callback said, we said we were 84. I'm sorry, I'm losing my trend here. We said we were 84. There's no further response necessary. With that, the guy called again. So now it aroused suspicion of a lot of officers, and they all showed up on the scene. And we happened to be downstairs and in front of the place. We weren't inside. And we said, there's some crazy guy here, must be calling the police for no reason. So Central located the guy on the phone. We went upstairs and we met him. And he was there with his friend. And he said, officer, they're breaking in the apartment next door. I told him, would you stop calling the police? We're here. There's no need to call the police. We've been here for 15 minutes. He said, he didn't know. He's happy that we were there.
Did you make any money? Did you score up that job?
No.
Mr. Dowd, you said that you and your partner had agreed that you were going to graduate into more serious crimes at this point in your career. Did you accomplish that objective? Eventually?
Yes.
How did you accomplish that objective?
Well, what had happened was, through we had a very strong relationship with a local drug dealer. His name was Mr. Perez.
And who is Mr. Perez exactly?
Well, he was an owner of a automobile music shop.
Was he also a major drug trafficker?
That's a very hard question. He was involved in drugs, yes.
And the significance of the relationship then with Mr. Perez is this had marked the point in your career where you had graduated away from street dealers to more serious drug traffickers and drug organizations?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us about how your relationship with Baron Perez began to develop? In fact, if you could educate us about how a New York City cop first begins to develop a relationship with drug traffickers like this.
Well, it's like the relationship you would develop with anybody in the street that's a businessman. That's how it starts out. You say hello, how was your day, and you go from there. In this situation, he happened to be standing outside in front of his shop with a nice red Corvette, and, we caught our ride. There was an attractive lady standing next to it. We stopped to say hello, talk about the car, the girl, whatever was going on there. And shortly thereafter, we had a line of communication opened up, and he began inviting me for a beer, I began inviting him for a beer, and then one thing led to another, and we became like buddies.
While you were becoming buddies, though, there was an understanding that there was a lot that you could do for each other?
Well, it was obvious that his clients were all major drug dealers. And that was one of the reasons we were hanging around there.
Did you test out Baron Perez to see if you could rely on him in the same way or in any way that you had tested out your former partners?
Well, we had given him that bag of drugs that we took from Pine Street.
So he was the way that you fenced or got rid of the drugs from Pine Street?
Yes.
And after that, you knew that you could work together?
Yes, I mean, we just didn't simply hand it to him. We knew before that point that he was good. He wasn't going to hurt us. There's a lot that goes to doing that. You just don't hand it to somebody. You have to have the respect and fear and intimidation that has to go all with it. It's just not simple.
Could you explain that to us?
Explain it? Well, they know we're police officers, they know we're armed with guns, and if they were going to do any damage to us by whether our career or physically, they know that they'd have to pay the price as well. It'd be the first draw. And it was basically stated that way.
That were you in uniform for those times?
Yes.
We have a time frame as well for when this happened, Mr. Dowd.
Time frame in year?
Yes.
1987.
Thank you.
So your relationship with Baron Perez begins to develop in 1987, is that correct?
Yes.
Gets rid of drugs for you. What was the first major job that you did through Baron Perez at around this time?
He had a drug dealer come to him who was looking for some kind of protection around the 4th of July weekend in 1987. So what had happened was him and I and Baron were there, and we discussed a few things. A few things transpired, and Baron came to me and said, listen, the guy really wants to pay you money to protect his business. I said, I understand, but there's really not much I can do for him. I'm a patrolman in the blue and white. What can I tell him? So he's a smart guy, this Perez. He says, just lie to him. I said, all right, we'll lie to him. So he said he wants to know if he's safe for the 4th of July weekend. So I used my knowledge of the police department. There's not that many narcotics officers are working on 4th of July weekend. If they are, they're on details, whether it's in Central Park or the boats are coming in or whatever. The beaches are packed with cops. So I said, yeah, you're safe for the weekend. It's a good weekend.
Based on your common knowledge and nothing else, common sense?
Yeah, I had no information.
When you say protecting, could you explain to the commissioners what you meant by protecting?
Well, they think that you're going to give them protection. Like if there's a raid going down, you'll know. If there's cars in the area that are about to do a raid, you'll be able to tip them off. That's protection.
Did you get paid for giving this drug dealer common sense, knowledge?
Yeah, I got paid.
How much did you get paid?
I don't know whether it was $7,000 or $8,000.
Can you tell us, how were you protecting him that weekend? Were you on duty when you were protecting him?
No, I was home in my yard having a barbecue.
Okay. Did you get all the $8,000? The money?
No, he shorted us a little bit.
So what did you do?
So we sat on his location for about 2 weeks.
Where's his location? Was that out of your sector?
About 3 miles from my sector.
3 miles out of your sector. So what did you do to use your authority as a New York City cop to ensure that you get paid?
I started harassing his business.
Mm-hmm. So you're sitting on his location, in uniform?
Yep.
While you're on duty?
Yes.
In your RMP?
Yes.
At a drug-prone location for over 2 weeks?
Well, off and on for 2 weeks.
Off and on for a period of 2 weeks. So Dowd, did any supervisor ever say to you, Dowd, what are you doing 3 miles out of your sector?
No.
Did anyone ever say to you, hey Dowd, where have you been for the last 2 weeks? Any of the supervisors in your sector?
No.
Was this the first time that you would use your authority as a New York City cop to sit on a drug location in uniform, in your RMP, to intimidate a dealer into paying you money that he owed you?
Yes, it was the first time.
It was the first. Was it your last?
No.
After that, did you and Mr. Perez reach an agreement, so to speak, about what you could do for each other?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that? Was there any...
Before you do that, when you said he shorted you, what amount of money did he give you?
I don't remember if it was $6,300 or $7,300. 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
But you were expecting 8,000, is that it? And he
Yes.
gave, at the end of the 2 weeks, did he make up the difference, or
Yes.
did you have a discussion?
No, he made it up. And there was a lot more to it, sir.
right.
Some idle threats went, and there was a lot to it.
But the chairman raised a good point. By using your authority and intimidating him and then sitting on his location, you eventually got paid.
Yes.
You were telling us about the agreement.
It was a drug spot. It was a known drug spot. So we went and, I guess, and the beginning of '85, end of '84. And the individual, we got the call, we arrived, and there was a guy shot in the head. And we noticed it was a drug spot. It was a known drug spot. So we went inside, and there's a pandemonium, of course, because there's people, there's a guy shot, there's a guy trying to administer first aid, and he's faking it, and I know he's faking it because he probably shot him, I'm saying to myself. One thing leads to another. We end up searching the premise. I find some money, a couple pounds of reefer. After I found the money, I found another little stack of money of $100 bills. And no one was around, so I put it in my pocket.
And then what happened?
Well, the sergeant arrived on the scene, and after he did an inventory of the place and he counted the money that was being vouchered and took the drugs, he said, "Is that all the money that's here?" And I got nervous, and I took the money out of my pocket and gave it to him.
What did you say to him?
What did I say to him? I said, "Oh, I was holding this. I didn't want anyone to steal it."
And he accepted that?
Yes.
Another way of CYA, Mr. Dowd?
Yeah, sure.
Always having an answer? Did you see that sergeant afterwards, after that incident?
Yes, I did.
And did you have a conversation with him about that incident?
Yes.
Could you tell us what the substance of the conversation was?
Well, we were out at a watering hole on Long Island, a couple of us, and I grabbed him to the side and I said to him, "Sarge, listen, I'm embarrassed about what happened." I says, "But, I'll tell you the truth. I was thinking about keeping the money." And he said, "Well, a few explicits, you idiot," whatever you want to say, without saying the real things he said. He said, "You had it in your pocket, it was yours. You should have kept it."
And this was the sergeant who was meant to be supervising you in the 75th Precinct?
Yes.
You socialized with sergeants, Mr. Dowd? During that time?
Sure.
Did you become friendly with them?
Yes.
Was it difficult, given the social relationship you had, for them to supervise you effectively?
It was more difficult, yes.
What was the message you received as a patrolman when a sergeant tells you, "You idiot, that was yours, you should have kept it"?
I'll never do that again.
That is, never give it back again.
I'll make sure I get what I can before he gets there.
Mr. Dowd, eventually, during your assignment to the 75th Precinct, did you come to be assigned with a regular partner? And here again, I want to emphasize that you should refrain from using the names of these individuals. Did you
Yes.
come to be, yes? Did you, like the other officers, form a pact with this first partner of yours?
Yes.
How did it come about?
While we were in... I'm sorry, can you go back
Yes.
to...
I'm asking you whether with your first partner in the 75th Precinct, your first regular partner,
Right.
did you, like you did with other officers, form a pact with him with regard to corruption matters?
Yes.
Can you tell us, please, what it was?
Well, it's basically simple. We do a little corrupt act together, and from there we know that, well, you can't tell on me, I can't tell on you, and you better not tell on me, or, there's a price to pay.
Again, this is what's become known as the Dowd test.
Well,
engaging in minor acts of corruption?
Yes, we would drink to start it off.
Did you start to engage with him in more serious forms of corruption and crime?
Yes.
Could you tell the commission, please, what it was you and your partner engaged in?
Well, I had a motorist pay us some money
Motorist paid you money for what?
for not giving him summonses.
Okay. Did you graduate from there with your partner into more lucrative forms of corruption with regard to the narcotics trade in the area?
Well, these are two different partners now.
No, I'm talking about your first regular partner, okay? Did there come a time, Mr. Dowd, when you and a partner of yours decided to profit from the drug dealers
Yes.
in the 75th Precinct?
Yes.
Could you tell us what exactly you planned to do and how you carried it out?
Well, we planned. We sat together in the car. We had a couple of beers. We talked about it. I knew his family from the neighborhood. He knew my family, and we held a strong bond between each other. And we vowed that we would never give each other up. And let's go out and make some money.
Let's go out and make money off the job, right?
Yeah.
So how did you do it? What'd you do?
We shook down drug dealers.
Okay, when you say shake down drug dealers, what does that exactly mean?
It means you get a call to a location, and maybe the third time today, and you're tired of going, so you make the guy pay. You take his proceeds, his cash and his drugs, and either you take the drugs or throw them out.
Well, why don't you just describe for us an incident perhaps that you remember? So an incident that illustrates how you would get money from a drug dealer without the drug dealer in any way complaining or having any repercussions from you.
Well, it's not that difficult to take money and drugs from any drug dealer. You get a call, you get a description, you show up. He's standing on the corner. He's got drugs. He knows he's going to jail if you want. So instead of sending him to jail, you take his drugs and his money. I mean, I don't think it's very hard to...
Just reach into his pockets and take his drugs and his money?
Yeah.
Did you ever leave him any drugs or any money to keep him happy?
Yeah, sure. You didn't want to get him, too upset with you.
What's the reason for that?
Well, you didn't want to, if he was broke, he'd have to answer to his bosses, so you'd have next time you may have a problem with him. And his boss would tell him, make a complaint on this cop.
So in other words, you would leave him some drugs and money in order to keep him satisfied and perhaps keep him silent about your activities?
Yes, without a doubt.
How often did these shakedowns occur? Let's say in that first year you were working with your partner.
How often in number, or how?
How often? How often in a day? How often in a week?
5 times a day.
Did you have any plans that you made with your partner regarding how much money you and he would like to make off the job?
Yeah, eventually we got so good that we started to set goals on how much money we would get each day.
Let me just stop you there for a minute. When you say you got so good at what? Good at shaking down the drug
Good at shaking them down with no repercussions.
What sort of goals did you and your partner set?
Well, in the beginning we set it moderate, like $200 each a day from the street dealers.
That's moderate.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then around the holidays we go up to $500 a day.
Was it easy to make that kind of money? An extra $1,000 a week or an extra $2,500 a week just by shaking down drug dealers?
Yes, very easy.
On what tours would you commit these crimes, Mr. Dowd?
Well, mostly the 4 to 12s, but if the day tours were out there, we'd take them too.
So this could go on any time of day, in broad daylight?
Yeah.
Or under the cover of darkness?
Anytime.
Besides yourself and your partner, were you aware if other police officers assigned to that precinct were engaged in the same kind of crimes?
Yes.
How did you know? What's the basis for your knowledge?
Well, I did them with them.
With other police officers?
Yes.
Is that when your partner wasn't available?
Well, it could be at the same time. We'd all roll up on a spot or a corner or whatever. There may be 20 guys selling on one corner.
And did that happen often, where a number of radio motor patrol cars would roll up to shake down drug dealers?
Yes.
In your experience and based on your first-hand knowledge, how many police officers were involved in that activity in the 75th Precinct?
I believe I told you earlier about 12, 15.
Okay, the same number that was in your original crew, is that right?
Yes.
Would you also steal drugs from these drug dealers, Mr. Dowd?
Yes.
Would the other officers steal drugs from the drug dealers as well?
Yes. I don't know what they did with it, all of them, but, you know, some of them even gave it to us.
Some people have said that this kind of corruption is a matter of opportunity, but what you seem to be saying is that this was premeditated and planned. Is that your experience?
It was a daily basis. It was something that happened daily. It was planned. I don't know if you had to plan that. It was just regular, everyday patrol.
You said you set goals in the amount of money that you wanted to make, correct?
Correct.
That you would pick out certain locations to hit, correct?
Yes.
That you would go to a clandestine location known as the pool to
Yes.
plan this. So what you're talking about here is a number of officers.
Dollars in cash
Yes.
every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday.
Did anyone ever stop you and ask what you were doing every Tuesday? In
No.
uniform going to this drug location?
No.
Mr. Dowd, did the services that you're being paid so generously for derive solely from the fact that you were a New York City police officer?
Yes.
And is it accurate that if not for your badge and your uniform, that you could never have made a cent from Barron Perez and the other drug traffickers?
It's pretty accurate.
Mr. Dowd, could you enlighten us? What can a patrol officer, like yourself, or any patrol officer, offer to drug organizations that could be worthy of such a price tag?
Well, there's two different types of things you can offer. One would be intangible things, and then there would be the tangible things.
Why don't we start with the intangibles? Explain that if you could.
All right, intangibles would be, a drug dealer would be able to brag amongst other drug dealers that he got a cop on his payroll. And that would give him a lot of respect in the drug world. And by getting respect, that would give him power amongst other drug dealers to leave him alone, not to compete with him, various things of that nature that would, you know, come with that. He'd have juice.
And by juice, you mean power.
Yeah.
Power to rival drug dealers.
Right.
And that power came from the fact they had a New York City cop on their payroll?
Yes.
What about the tangible benefits, Mr. Dowd? Could you tell us about that?
Well, tangible benefits, you're talking about being able to, if you come across information, to tip him off with it. Also, you're able to put pressure on his other drug dealers that are giving him competition in the neighborhood.
Let's stick with the information, if we could, for a moment. Tell us about that. Was the information that you were providing to these drug dealers, was it real? Or was it, again, common sense like you'd mentioned before?
Most of it was even imagined, but some of it was real.
So, was most of it imagined, you mean?
Yes.
And you were getting paid even for the imagined information that you would provide?
Yes.
But there was no way of them ever knowing if the information was imagined or not, is that correct?
No, because if you tell them there's going to be a bust today and they close their shop up and they don't get busted, they feel they won.
So you were always safe?
Right.
You had a stream of income guaranteed even from fabricating information that they'd never know about.
Right.
What about real information, Mr. Dowd? Did you ever provide these drug traffickers with real information?
On one specific occasion, I was able to save their day.
Could you tell us about that?
I was working the sector that I normally work, and his business happened to be at this time in the sector that I normally work, and I saw an undercover agent in the neighborhood, about a block or two away from his store, and I happened to just pull up alongside and ask him what's up. You know, agents are pretty tight-lipped, and for good reason. He says, Nothing much. He says, we got something going on. I said, oh yeah, and he said, I asked him where, and he said, around the corner. That was all he would say. Now, there's 4 different ways to go around the corner, but I know that there was 6 drug spots on the corner, around the corner. The one where my employee, you want to call him, was located.
One of the employees that you were protecting?
Yes.
Getting paid for protecting?
Right.
Okay, so what did you do with the information that this agent that wasn't tight-lipped in this instance gave to you?
Well, I figured I had nothing to lose by telling him that he might be getting busted, so I went into the store, I parked the car across the street, I walked across, my partner sat in the car, I went inside, I picked up 2 Heinekens, I walked to the counter, I made a hand motion like this to the guy behind the counter, and I mouthed the word close. I took the 2 beers, put them in a bag, and walked out.
So even though you know that that locations in the area are under surveillance by agents, law enforcement agents, walk into one of the locations in uniform, give them a sign, walk out with 2 beers?
Yeah.
Were you afraid at the time?
Yeah.
But you did it anyway?
Yeah.
And why was that?
The guy was paying me $8,000 a week.
So it made it worth your while?
Yep.
Did they raid the store after you left?
Shortly thereafter.
Could you tell us about that? Chairman raised a good point. What happened after that?
Well, I left because I didn't want to. I knew the area was hot, and I knew what I had done was bad, and I knew that if there was a raid and it was that location, I didn't want to be around to see it. So they came, and mind you that I hate to minimize things, but I did make sure that they had no guns or anything like that in the location. I told them straight up, no guns in your location, because I didn't want any agents or anybody getting hurt, because I still was a police officer. Even though it doesn't seem that way at times, I still had my heart there, half the way.
I just want to clarify. So was that location ultimately raided?
Yes, it was.
And as a result of the information, the sign that you had given them, what happened? Was the raid thwarted?
Yes. They found nothing.
Because they knew to discontinue any
Right.
operations at that time?
Correct.
Okay, so you were able to thwart that raid?
Yes.
Did a single supervisor ever come up to you and ask you about the fact that you pulled up in your RMP just about the time this raid was supposed to take place, walked in, gave him a sign, and in a few minutes walked out with 2 Heinekens?
No.
No one questioned you about that at all?
No, I was surprised. I was actually waiting to be questioned. I thought I was maybe caught on tape somewhere, or I was surprised.
And what message did that send to you at that point, that not a single supervisor in the department ever asked you a question about that incident?
Well, I don't know. It was obvious that they didn't do anything. It was obvious they couldn't catch me or they couldn't do anything. I don't know.
Do you know whether the undercover cop saw you go into the place before the raid took place?
The one that I had spoken to?
Yes.
Because there's usually dozens of them around. The one I had spoken to didn't see me go in.
You don't know whether some other undercover...
I'm sure there was undercover around. They're probably surveilling the place constantly.
Mr. Dowd, did these drug organizations that you were protecting ever want you to protect them not only from law enforcement, but to use your authority as a New York City cop to protect them from rival drug dealers?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, when you say protect them from rival drug dealers, it was more or less the competition. They wanted us to keep pressure on them. So what we would do was, there was times when we would... Yes.
Okay. So you went to that drug location in uniform?
Yes.
Times to pick up $8,000 in cash?
Yes.
Every Tuesday?
Every Tuesday.
Did anyone ever stop you and ask what you were doing every Tuesday? In
No.
uniform going to this drug location?
No.
Mr. Dowd, did the services that you're being paid so generously for derive solely from the fact that you were a New York City police officer?
Yes.
And is it accurate that if not for your badge and your uniform, that you could never have made a cent from Baron Perez and the other drug traffickers?
It's pretty accurate.
Mr. Dowd, could you enlighten us? What can a patrol officer like yourself or any patrol officer, offered to drug organizations that could be worthy of such a price tag?
Well, there's two different types of things you can offer. One would be intangible things, and then there would be the tangible things.
Why don't we start with the intangibles? Explain that if you could.
All right, intangibles would be, a drug dealer would be able to brag amongst other drug dealers that he got a cop on his payroll. And that would give him a lot of respect in the drug world. And by getting respect, that would give him power amongst other drug dealers to leave him alone, not to compete with him, various things of that nature that would, come with that. He'd have juice.
And by juice, you mean power.
Yeah.
Power to rival drug dealers.
Right.
And that power came from the fact they had a New York City cop on their payroll?
Yes.
What about the tangible benefits, Mr. Dowd? Could you tell us about that?
Well, tangible benefits, you're talking about being able to, if you come across information, to tip him off with it. Also, you're able to put pressure on his other drug dealers that are giving him competition in the neighborhood.
Let's stick with the information, if we could, for a moment. Tell us about that. Was the information that you were providing to these drug dealers, was it real? Or was it, again, common sense like we mentioned before?
Most of it was even imagined, but some of it was real.
So, was most of it imagined, you mean?
Yes.
And you were getting paid even for the imagined information that you would provide?
Yes.
But there was no way of them ever knowing if the information was imagined or not, is that correct?
No, because if you tell them there's going to be a bust today and they close their shop up and they don't get busted, they feel they won.
So you were always safe?
Right.
You had a stream of income guaranteed even from fabricating information that they'd never know about.
Right.
What about real information, Mr. Dowd? Did you ever provide these drug traffickers with real information?
One specific occasion I was able to save their day.
Could you tell us about that?
I was working the sector that I normally work, and his business happened to be at this time in the sector that I normally work, and I saw an undercover agent in the neighborhood, about a block or two away from his store, and I happened to just pull up alongside and ask him what's up. Agents are pretty tight-lipped, and for good reason. He says, nothing much. He says, we got something going on. I said, oh yeah, and he said, I asked him where, and he said, around the corner. That was all he would say. Now, there's 4 different ways to go around the corner, but I know that there was 6 drug spots on the corner, around the corner. The one where my employee, you want to call him, was located.
One of the employees that you were protecting?
Yes.
Getting paid for protecting?
Right.
Okay, so what did you do with the information that this agent that wasn't tight-lipped in this instance gave to you?
Well, I figured I had nothing to lose by telling him that he might be getting busted, so I went into the store, I parked the car across the street, I walked across, my partner sat in the car, I went inside, I picked up 2 Heinekens, I walked to the counter, I made a hand motion like this to the guy behind the counter, and I mouthed the word close. I took the 2 beers, put them in the bag, and walked out.
So even though you know that location, locations in the area are under surveillance by agents, law enforcement agents, walk into one of the locations in uniform, give them a sign, walk out with 2 beers?
Yeah.
Were you afraid at the time?
Yeah.
But you did it anyway?
Yeah.
And why was that?
The guy was paying me $8,000 a week.
So it made it worth your while?
Yep.
Did they raid the store after you left?
Shortly thereafter.
Could you tell us about that? The chairman raised a good point. What happened after that?
Well, I left because I didn't want to. I knew the area was hot, and I knew what I had done was bad, and I knew that if there was a raid and it was that location, I didn't want to be around to see it. So they came, and mind you that I hate to minimize things, but I did make sure that they had no guns or anything like that in the location. I told them straight up, no guns in your location, because I didn't want any agents or anybody getting hurt, because I still was a police officer. Even though it doesn't seem that way at times, I still had my heart there, half the way.
I just want to clarify. So was that location ultimately raided?
Yes, it was.
And as a result of the information, the sign that you had given them, what happened? Was the raid thwarted?
Yes. They found nothing.
Because they knew to discontinue any
Right.
operations at that time?
Correct.
Okay, so you were able to thwart that raid?
Yes.
Did a single supervisor ever come up to you and ask you about the fact that you pulled up in your RMP just about the time this raid was supposed to take place, walked in, gave him a sign, and in a few minutes walked out with 2 Heinekens?
No.
No one questioned you about that at all?
No, I was surprised. I was actually waiting to be questioned. I thought I was maybe caught on tape somewhere, or I was surprised.
And what message did that send to you at that point, that not a single supervisor in the department ever asked you a question about that incident?
Well, I don't know. It was obvious that they didn't do anything. It was obvious they couldn't catch me or they couldn't do anything. I don't.
Do you know whether the undercover cop saw you go into the place before the raid took place?
The one that I had spoken to?
Yes.
Because there's usually dozens of them around. The one I had spoken to didn't see me go in.
You don't know whether some other undercover?
I'm sure there was undercover around. They're probably surveilling the place constantly.
Mr. Dowd, did these drug organizations that you were protecting ever want you to protect them not only from law enforcement, but to use your authority as a New York City cop to protect them from rival drug dealers?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, when you say protect them from rival drug dealers, it was more or less the competition. They wanted us to keep pressure on them. So what we would do was, there was times when we would, like I had said earlier, we'd camp out in front of their stores so that they couldn't do business.
Camping out, you mean you'd be in your RMP?
Yeah.
In uniform?
Yeah.
While on duty?
Right.
Okay, continue.
We would also sometimes have the guys that used to be on the job would come in and they'd pressure them. They'd go in and make believe they were Brooklyn North Narcotics, do a fake raid on the place, and we'd be outside in the radio car.
You'd do a fake raid, and then what would you do?
I'd be there to back them up. In the car. I wouldn't have to go in. They just went in there to show that there was force and that, they'd leave a message overtly or not about what they were doing. Whether they were putting pressure on the Diaz organization or not.
Diaz organization being a competing rival drug organization?
Right. Well, Diaz organization is the organization that was paying me.
One of the organizations that was paying you, is that right?
Right.
Any other ways that you were able to use your authority as a New York City cop to protect rival drug dealers and to earn your paycheck?
Well, I was able to maybe put paperwork in on other locations. In other words, intelligence reports. And through those intelligence reports, I would be able to put legitimate pressure on the other organizations through narcotics raids.
And what kind of pressure were you trying to put on them? What were you trying to accomplish with that pressure?
Well, I wanted there to be less competition or at least cooperation amongst them.
In terms of pricing, you mean?
Yes.
So it was a sense of price control as well.
Yes.
You were trying to establish your authority as a cop.
Right.
Mr. Dowd, are you familiar with the phrase riding shotgun?
Yes.
Could you tell us what that means?
Oh, riding shotgun simply would be guarding somebody as they transport drugs or money or whatever it happens to be.
Did you ever ride shotgun for any drug traffickers?
Well, that I can recall, I did it once.
So what you mean by that, then once when you're in uniform, I assume?
Yes.
In your RMP?
Right.
You were following drug traffickers to protect them in case law enforcement stopped them?
Well, for 2 reasons. One was for other officers wouldn't stop them, and the other one was for other drug dealers, keep them from being robbed.
How else were you assisting the drug traffickers at this stage in your career? Were you ever assisting them in finding specific spots or drug locations?
Yes, well, what had happened was after the raid went down that I was able to thwart. About 7 days later, they were raided again, and they were arrested, several of the people inside. And I had told the owner of the business, I says, listen, you know, how much more could I do for you? I said, you know, this is crazy, you gotta move. So I ended up knowing a guy who was selling a bodega, and I suggested they move there. It was a better, more secluded location.
And they really couldn't question if you said that a location was hot. They would never question that, given your authority, given your inside knowledge that they assumed you had.
Well, I mean, you know, I was out there 8.5 hours a day. I know what spots were hot and which weren't.
Based upon your testimony today, is it fair to say that you were a fairly central figure to these drug organizations?
Well, they looked for me for a lot of information.
Look to you, let's see, as based on your testimony as to when they could deal drugs, is that true?
Yes.
Where they could deal drugs, is that true? In
Yes.
some instances, how they could deal drugs, is that true? Safely.
Yes.
So is it fair to say then that you were a pretty central figure for these drug traffickers? They looked to you to tell them how they could survive, how they could make money.
Yeah, the evidence points that way.
Mr. Dowd, were there ever any other police officers that were assisting you in your efforts with these drug traffickers?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Well, there was my partner, who was a central figure to anything I did. There were many of the officers in the precinct knew we were doing things, and they would be willing to help us at any cost.
What do you mean by that?
What do I mean? They wanted to be around us. You know, they wanted to know what was going on and how they can get in on it.
Were these all the cops in your precinct that wanted to get on it, or were there a certain group of cops in your precinct?
It was a certain number. It was basically the cops that worked with us.
How many cops are you talking about?
This is 2 years later, so it's about another 10 or 15 different cops.
So we're in 1987, right?
The end of '87, the beginning of '88.
And you're saying that there were 10 to 15 other cops that were working with you?
When you say working with me, that's different. I don't
Well,
like
let me
to...
ask you, you just made reference to 10 or 15 cops assisting you. Could you explain to us what you mean by that?
Well, if they knew that they knew that we needed information. If they had any information, they would give it to us. If they knew of a location that was doing some business, they would tell us.
And what was in it for them?
Well, they were hoping to score points with us so that we could put them on the dole out, you know, give them money, show them how to make money.
Was this a way for them to get in? Now, they weren't helping you with your major drug organizations, is that what you're saying?
No.
So they were helping you, giving you tips to try to get on your good side?
Yes.
With the hope that maybe one day they could graduate into assisting you with these drug traffickers?
Well, what had happened was they took over the petty stuff, most of them.
Because you had graduated now into doing more serious crimes.
That's correct.
Did you help
Tell
them?
me a little bit of the other commissioners about your feeling and your reaction to the fact that indeed you weren't questioned and you weren't in any way caught during the course of all these dealings. Did that, for instance, somehow embolden you to do more in this area? Did you feel free about what you were going to do?
First of all, there was times when I was shocked that I got away with so many of these things. Also, mind you, I was becoming heavily addicted to cocaine and alcohol, so my inhibitions were down, and some personal problems I've been going through too. So all that combined, it certainly shocked me. I don't know how sometimes I showed up for work.
Mr. Dell, we'll get to your drug addiction in a few moments. What about the non-corrupt cops in your precinct at this time? They know what you were up to?
Yes.
They knew that you were working for drug traffickers?
They had, look, they're cops, they have an idea, you know, they don't have to come out and say they know things. The cop's a cop, they can read.
And despite that, did a single officer ever say to you, Dowd, I know what you're up to, you better cut it out?
No.
They even suggest they knew you were up to,
They were
you better cut it out?
They were afraid to say anything.
Even the honest cops?
Yes.
Even though they knew that you as a corrupt cop were making their life more difficult on the job?
I guess so. They never said anything to me.
Why would that be? Why would even the honest cops remain silent?
They don't want to ruin their career as being labeled a rat.
And so the fear of being labeled a rat was so powerful that even the honest cops would remain silent, you're saying?
Yep.
Were they ever trying to thwart your efforts in any way, Mr. Dowd? The honest cops or the other cops that you weren't working with during your years in working with these drug organizations?
No.
Were they actually assisting you in any way? What are you saying?
Sometimes they would.
They would assist you? How would that? How would
Well,
that come about?
I'll give you an example. Like a guy would be honest. He's an honest cop. He's not taking money. He's doing his job, but he knows that I'm taking money or whatever I'm doing at the time. And maybe he would tip me off that the boss wants summonses written over at this location. It happens to be my friend's spot. He'll tell me, look, Mike, you know, the boss has ordered me to go over there and give summonses out. So this went on for in one instance, for about a week, until finally the lieutenant himself had to go out and give the summonses out.
The lieutenant himself had to go give out the summonses because the other cops refused to do it because it was one of your locations?
Yeah.
So by 1987, Mr. Dowd, you're fairly deeply entrenched in the narcotics trade in the 75th Precinct. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Were you still engaging in the more minor kinds of corruption? I hate to use the word minor, but shaking down drug dealers, that kind of corruption that you were engaging in your early days in the 75th Precinct?
If an opportunity came along where it was a big enough score, yes, but for the little stuff, no.
So you'd really just basically at this point graduated just the more serious crimes.
Right. I mean, if I had to recant, I probably couldn't recant one incident, but I'm sure there was.
You mentioned your drug use a few moments ago, Mr. Dowd. Was your use of drugs getting heavier at this point in your career?
I'll say.
Could you tell us about that?
I was using drugs heavily.
On the job?
Yes.
In uniform?
Yes.
While you were on duty, you're saying?
Yes.
What kind of drugs are you talking about?
Cocaine and alcohol.
Were you trying to conceal your use of drugs and alcohol on the job?
In the beginning, I did.
What about later on?
Well, I used to do it off the dashboard.
Off the dashboard?
Yeah.
The dashboard of your RMP?
Yeah.
You do lines of coke off the dashboard in your RMP when you were on duty?
Yes.
Would that be in front of your partner?
Yes.
Is he doing it with you?
No.
Were you aware of whether any other cops were using drugs while they were on duty, Mr. Dowd?
I can't say. It's possible.
Did a single supervisor ever question you about the use of drugs during your time in the 75th Precinct?
No.
You said you were drinking. You made a reference to drinking on the job. Is that correct?
Yes.
How often were you drinking on the job at this point in your career?
Every day.
How much?
Depends what I was drinking.
What I mean is, were you visibly drunk while you were on duty ever at this point in your career?
Sometimes.
Did anyone again, a supervisor, ever stop you and say, Dowd, I know you're drinking on the job, cut it out?
No one ever said that to me.
Did a single cop ever say to you, Dowd, you're on duty, you're in uniform. What are you doing drinking on the job?
Not at this point.
Were there other police officers that are drinking on the job as well at this time?
Well, that's probably why they never said anything.
Give us a sense of what you mean by that. How many police officers are drinking on the job, on duty, while in uniform during this time in the 75th Precinct?
Well, I don't know their drinking habits, but certainly there was a good 8 to 10 every day drinking on the job with us.
And Mr. Dowd, do you base it on your personal knowledge?
Yes.
Based on your personal knowledge, have you witnessed 8 to 10 cops drinking on the job?
No, there's dozens of cops drinking all day long. Witnessing, depends where, what time. They drink all day long.
Were any of these cops ever driving their RMP while they were under the influence of alcohol?
Yes.
And that was a regular occurrence?
They were working.
Sir Dowd, were you or the other cops trying to do anything to conceal your alcohol consumption at this point in your career?
Yeah, we put a breath mint in, maybe.
But give us a breath mint. How would you do it? How could you drive around in your RMP drinking beers without anyone ever stopping you? Was there a trick? Secret?
How does anybody drink and drive?
Mr. Dowd, when you would be taking cocaine off the dashboard, did your partner ever try to dissuade you in any way? Or try?
No, he was happy when I did the coke because he knew I got in a better mood. He knew I'd be able to concentrate more and, you know.
Mr. Dowd, during this period of 1987 to 1988, did you ever perceive what you thought to be representatives of internal affairs around maybe surveilling any of your activities?
There may have been one or two occasions.
And did you take any steps when you thought you saw someone from an internal affairs following you or your crew during that period?
There was nothing. There was no steps to take. Just went about our regular day.
Did you ever get any tips from any fellow officers, within or without your precinct, during the period of 1977, 87, and 88, about possible IAD surveillance?
Well, look, oftentimes they're known to be in the precinct. I mean, you know, they're known to be there. And in other words, someone saw them that day, and then, you know, we know they're there for us, so we just be careful that day.
So from time to time, there was at least a report that they were around, and you took suitable action, or perhaps I should say inaction, on that day?
Not necessarily. We just were more cautious.
Thank you.
In the precinct, was there a PBA delegate assigned to the precinct?
Yes.
Is that so in every precinct?
Yes.
Did you ever have any discussions with the PBA delegate, or did he ever discuss with you the fact that you were drinking on the job or using drugs on the job?
No, most of them were drinking too.
Can I go back to the woman who complained about your having stolen her gun? And there was a statement you made, and maybe I misunderstood it, about you weren't sure whether she ever even made it to the desk. Could you explain that to us?
Well, what had happened was I had heard that she came to the precinct to make a complaint. Someone had told me that a woman came in the precinct making a complaint that we had stolen her gun. Nobody comes in and complains that you stole their gun.
Why is that?
Because it was an illegal possession. She didn't have a license for it. I was shocked. And just as well as everybody else probably was, and said she's crazy.
Mr. Dowd, let's go back.
Ms. Marcos, Mr. Dowd, during the course of your testimony, you indicated that police officers learned about your activities and they would tip you off and do you favors.
Yeah.
How many police officers were involved in your activities, were a part of your team or your group?
At what point, sir?
When you were riding shotgun for drug dealers or...
87, 88 time?
yes, and during that time frame.
There's a distinction of being actually involved with me and being supportive of me. You know, involved was just me and my partner in that one specific thing. But there was other officers that were basically frothing at the mouth to be involved, so they'd do anything to assist us.
They would assist you, they wanted to be a part of your activities?
Yes.
And how many officers indicated to you that they were interested in joining with you in your activities?
10 to 15, at least.
10 or 15?
Yeah.
You didn't let all of them in, did you, Mr. Dowd?
No, I told them to go wear out some shoes first and we'll talk.
And why was it that you didn't want to let that larger group of police officers involved in your activities with the drug traffickers?
Because I'd have to split up the money with them.
Mr. Dowd, Mr. Dowd, let's go back to the 75th precinct now. Time's around 1987. based upon what you've testified to over the last hour, you were a pretty busy man in the 75th Precinct. You were using your authority as a police officer daily to assist narcotics enterprises, is that correct?
Yes.
You're selling narcotics on the side, is that correct?
Yes.
You're using drugs and alcohol daily,
Yes.
and you're making whatever money off the job you could.
Yes.
My question at this point, Mr. Dowd, is how did this affect your ability to be a New York City police officer?
I don't know. I did the job I could do.
You did the job you could do, but let me ask you this, Mr. Dowd. How many arrests did you make after your return from Coney Island, the 75th Precinct?
I don't believe I made any.
How many times were you testifying in court after your return to the 75th Precinct?
I don't recall testifying in court.
How fast were you responding to radio runs if there wasn't money to be made at the other end?
Not very quickly.
And how often were you off post?
Quite often.
Mr. Dowd, you said a few seconds ago that when you came back to the 75, you did not make any arrests.
I believe that to be correct.
Did any superior officer ever ask you why you were not able to effect any arrests in what apparently was a fairly high crime area?
No, they were happy that I wasn't making arrests because it wasn't costing the city any money.
So, Mr. Dowd, given that you've made no arrests, you're not testifying in court, you're not responding to radio calls very quickly, most good part of your day is off post, you're drinking daily on the job, using drugs on the job, and most of your energies, you said before, are focused on increasing the powers of these drug traffickers. Let me ask the question another way. At this point in your career, did you consider yourself to be a New York City cop or a drug trafficker?
Well, it's both.
Mr. Chairman, I think this might be a good time for the commission to adjourn for lunch. We will resume within 1 hour at about 10:05.
We'll take a 45-minute recess. We'll resume at 1:45. And we'll recess now.
Before we get started.
You'll bear that in mind, Mr. Dowd.
You mind?
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Dowd, just before break, you had testified that it was unclear in your mind by your last few years in the 75th Precinct whether you were considered yourself to be a cop or a drug trafficker. I wanted to explore the reason why that was just briefly. By late 1987, how much money were you making a week through your narcotics activities?
Anywhere between $4,000 and $5,000.
Between $4,000 and $5,000?
Yeah, for myself.
By late 1987, how much money were you making a week from your New York City paycheck?
About 400.
So you're making almost 10 times as much money from your criminal activities at this time than you were from the paycheck you're receiving from your department, is that correct?
That's correct.
How important was that New York City paycheck to you at this time?
Well, I used to forget to pick it up.
Who did you consider to be your primary employer, in fact, at this point, Mr. Dowd? The department who gave you your shield, or the drug traffickers who were willing to pay you because of it?
That's a very difficult question to answer straight out. I mean, I enjoyed being a police officer, believe it or not.
You enjoyed it?
Yes.
You enjoyed it because of the power that it gave you?
I guess that's one aspect. But I enjoyed being a police officer. I actually enjoyed the rare moments when I did help somebody. I enjoyed it.
And you enjoyed the money that you were making off the job as well, I assume?
Yes.
Well, let me rephrase the question, though. At this point, who did you feel that you owed your allegiances to as a New York City police officer? The community that you were supposed to be policing, or the drug traffickers that you were protecting?
I guess I'll have to say the drug traffic.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
The drug traffic.
What about your lifestyle at this point, Mr. Dowd? Were you leading the life of a typical New York City cop?
I did the best I could to make it look that way.
You did the best you could to make it look that way. Could you tell the commissioners and the public what kind of car you were driving at around this time?
87 Corvette.
How many homes did you own?
4.
What kind of clothes were you wearing at this time?
Expensive.
And what kind of vacations were you taking?
Many.
And is that the kind of life that most New York City police officers were able to live based upon the paycheck that they were getting?
No.
I think that answers the question. Did you try to conceal your lavish lifestyle from the others in your precinct to try to avoid raising their suspicions?
In the beginning, after a while, I lost control of myself. I lost control of my life.
So they saw you in the red Corvette, in other words?
Yes.
They saw the kind of clothes you were wearing, the life you were leading?
Yes.
And how did these other cops react to that?
Well, they saw the exterior part of me, and they saw what they saw they liked, and they tried to cling to me.
I'm sorry?
They tried to cling to me. They chaperoned themselves around me. They wanted to know what I was doing. They wanted to be part of it.
Who wanted to be part of it exactly?
Whoever knew me.
Well, let's try to clarify that a bit. You're talking about officers in the precinct, correct?
Yes, mostly the young ones.
So you're talking mostly about the younger cops, the rookies?
Yeah, well, the older cops that were there had their own things going, so they really weren't interested.
What are you saying to us? Are you saying that you are a hero to the rookies?
In a lot of ways, yes.
And how did that manifest itself?
Well, they would help me. They would protect me. They would give me information. They would come to see me. They would. I don't know if it was out of fear, respect, whatever. They manifest.
Fear, respect, or both?
Yeah.
And were you giving them any tips on how to become a corrupt officer at this point?
Well, they all wanted a piece of the action, and like I had reiterated earlier, that I didn't let them into that because I knew it was wrong for one reason, and the other reasons was I didn't want to share with them. I sent them out into other endeavors.
You didn't want to share the profits you're making to the other drug traffickers?
Yes.
You said before they were giving you information. What did you mean by that the rookies were giving you information?
Well, they would tip me off if they saw narcotics guys in the precinct. They would tell me that there was maybe a suspicious-looking car, like an internal affairs car around. You know, it was like a brotherhood. You got to understand, regardless of what I was doing wrong, I was still there with them when they needed me, and they needed me plenty.
Did you make it worth their while to give you this kind of information?
Did I make it worth their while?
Mm-hmm. Give them any money? Were you sharing any profits?
No.
Mr. Dowd, this time in your career, was there any question in your mind as to whether the police officers and supervisors in your precinct knew what you were doing each day when you reported to work in uniform?
Was there no doubt?
Was there any question in your mind that they knew what you were doing each day when you reported to work?
They knew what I was doing.
And despite that, did a single cop ever say to you, Dowd, I know what you're up to, it's wrong, cut it out?
No.
Did a single precinct supervisor ever once say to you, Dowd, I know what you're up to, shape up, or you're out of this department?
No.
Over how long a period of time would you say that set of circumstances existed, Mr. Dowd?
Well, it began back in the early 80s, late 85, early 86.
And lasted until when?
Well, at that one location, it probably lasted till I went to the Rehabilitation in 1988.
How long was that?
Was what?
How long was that period of time when everybody actually knew and nobody did anything?
2.5, 3 years.
Thank you.
Mr. Dowd, by late 1987, you're riding high. You've testified that you're making lots of money off the job, $4,000 a week, and you're a hero to many of the rookies in your precinct. When did that end?
Well, it ended like I had just said to the chairman up there that I went to a alcohol rehabilitation program.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dowd.
When I went to an alcohol rehabilitation program.
We'll get to that, your experiences there in a few moments. After the alcohol rehabilitation program, did you ever return to the 75th precinct after that?
No.
So that would have been about March 1988 when you left the 75th precinct?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd, did your superiors in 75th Precinct know that you were riding around in that year model red Corvette and that you had 4 homes?
Yes.
Did anyone ever question you as to how you were able to afford that kind of lifestyle?
No, just small talk with other officers. They want to know how I did it.
Mr. Dowd, during your 5 years in the 75th precinct, is it fair to say that you graduated from quick scores to drug trafficking and other serious crimes?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you'd gone from being an occasional drug user to a drug addict and an alcoholic?
That's an accurate description.
Records indicate that this was no secret to the department. By the time you left the 75th precinct, you'd already accumulated several corruption allegations against you. My question is this, Mr. Dowd. At this point in your career, weren't you afraid you'd be caught?
No.
Apparently, you had some reason, there was some basis for your confidence in that area. I'd like to turn briefly now to your final evaluation in the 75th precinct. The year would be 1987. Before I turn to that, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Dowd, if you were a supervisor in the 75th precinct by the end of 1987, how would you have rated someone like yourself as a police officer?
Below standards.
And is that because in 1987 you'd reached the height of your career as a corrupt cop?
That's one of the reasons.
Is it also because you'd made 0 arrests that year or any of the previous years?
Yes, but I don't think the supervisors use that as a tool.
Okay. Might it also be because you were drinking and using drugs almost daily on the job?
That I know for a fact, so that would be personally, yes.
Well, let's turn to what your supervisor said in the 75th precinct when they were asked to evaluate you in 1987, because your opinions about yourself seem to differ. The supervisor that rated you at the end of 1987 didn't rate you below standards, but rated you as meeting standards, and in some categories that are not shown in this exhibit, they rated you as above standards. This is the evaluation that the Mollen Commission received when they asked the New York City Police Department for your personnel files. And your rater said the following: that the officer has excellent street knowledge, relates well with his peers, is empathetic to the community. This officer could excel within the New York City Police Department and easily become a role model for others to emulate if he maximized his inner drive to fulfill job responsibilities to the fullest. In lowercase, This supervisor said, must improve attendance and arrest activity, but then in all caps ended it by saying, good career potential. Mr. Dowd, did you see this evaluation in late 1987?
Yes.
And what did you think about that?
I was happy.
What message did getting an evaluation like this, after the year that you had in 1987, have upon you? What message did it send to you as a corrupt police officer?
I felt I could do just about anything.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, we couldn't understand
I could do just about anything and get away with it.
After the 75th precinct, you said that you went to alcohol rehabilitation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
That I went to alcohol rehabilitation.
Yes, could you tell us about your experiences there? Did you tell them that you had a cocaine problem when you went there?
Yes.
And what did they tell you?
Don't tell us that.
Could you expand upon what you were told? First of all,
Is it a police regulation that if a police officer is discovered to have used any kind of hard substance on any given occasion, that is a basis for immediate dismissal?
Yes, that's true.
okay, so in 1987 you go to the rehab clinic. Could you tell us what you told them and what they told you in response?
Well, they had known that I mean, it was pretty well known before I even got there that I was heavily using cocaine. And when I had gotten there, they said, before you say a word, they had a department psychologist there, and I believe a supervisor was right outside the room. And the department psychologist said, you can't talk to me about any kind of drug problems. If you have them, you have to keep them to yourself. We're not allowed to deal with that in this department. So go off to this rehab and do your best.
And you went off to the rehab clinic?
Yes.
And you were a cocaine addict at that point, is that correct?
Yes.
And did the alcohol rehabilitation program in any way help your drug program, your drug problem?
Temporarily.
Mr. Dowd, based on your personal knowledge, is it the normal practice of the New York City Police Department to send cops with drug addiction problems to alcohol rehabilitation programs?
Yes.
And why do you think that is?
Because they're not allowed to send them to drug rehabilitation, so they'll be fired.
And so what's the impact of that on cops with drug problems?
It's like a revolving door. Cops are constantly surrendering for alcohol problems every couple months, and they go right back to the same cycle. It's a cycle.
And is that based on your personal knowledge?
Well, I did it 3 times in 1 year.
We'll get to the other instances in a few minutes, but it's based on your personal knowledge.
I've seen other officers do the same thing.
Where were you assigned after the alcohol counseling program?
Motor Transport Division.
And is that known as a dumping ground?
It's a place where they send people for injuries on line of duty where they can't perform a normal function. That specific place, you could call it a dumping ground.
You were on restricted duty at this point?
Yes.
And you were there for a few months, is that correct?
Yeah, I was there for about 6 months.
Where were you assigned after that?
The Whitestone Pound.
And this would have been approximately October 1988?
Yes.
Could you tell the commissioners and the public what the Whitestone Pound is exactly?
The Whitestone Pound is a place where the New York City Police Department brings most of their arrest evidence vehicles, and the rotation tow operators tow their recovered cars from the street that may have been stolen and recovered by them to this location. They're dropped off there, and we warehouse them, inventory them, and warehouse them.
What kind of police officers are sent to the Whitestone Pound?
Most of them would be, you know, we have little nicknames, drunks, murderers, rapists, things like that.
And that's the collection of police officers that would be at the Whitestone Pound?
That's correct.
Were the corruption opportunities there presumably more limited than they were in the 75th Precinct?
Somewhat.
But did you nonetheless find ways to engage in corrupt activities and to make money off the job even at the Whitestone Pound?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, of course, it was much less. There was no cachets of drugs and money to be found, unless you found a good car, which I didn't.
When you say unless you found a good car, could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, sometimes there could, and it's happened in the past where cars have come in with loads of drugs still in them, or money.
And what would you do when that happened?
Well, I didn't do it, but I know what I would have done.
Oh, you were looking for it?
Yes.
But you never had the opportunity, you never found the actual drugs and
That's
money.
true.
So could you give us a sense of the kind of corruption that occurred at the Whitestone
Well,
Pound?
you could make money off of tow truck drivers by soliciting. People come in to pick up their cars, and when they come in to pick up their cars, they need a tow truck to take them to maybe Jersey or Long Island or upstate New York, and it's the further the ride, the more the tow would be, and you tell the tow guy, he has to kick back to you a little bit.
And did you receive many kickbacks?
Yes.
Were you seeking out these opportunities? Were you creating these opportunities to make money at the Whitestone
Yes,
Pound?
I wasn't the only one.
Let me just, before we get to that, were you creating the opportunities at all there, though, to make money?
Yes.
Could you give us an example of that?
Well, it's maybe a little humorous, a little crude, but we used to leave the lights on in some cars so that their batteries would go dead. And then the people would ask for a jump.
And they tip you.
Yeah.
Mr. Dowd, did you invent these corrupt acts at the Whitestone Pound, or were these long-established traditions that you learned about once you got there?
I didn't invent anything.
Were you acting alone when you were at the Whitestone Pound and carrying out these corrupt acts?
No. There's
Tell us
about
about
6 or 8 of us.
6 or 8. So is it fair to say that
in our crew, in our group.
in your group?
Right.
By group, do you mean crew?
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that just as in your early days in the 75th Precinct, when you got to the Whitestone Pound, you began to develop your own crew?
Well, I wasn't my development. It was a cohesiveness.
And were they also engaging, based on your personal knowledge, were they also engaging in these corrupt acts that you mentioned at the Whitestone Pound?
Well, I learned them from them.
Were you using drugs when you were at the Whitestone Pound, Mr. Dowd?
Yes.
While you were on duty?
Yes.
Were you the only police officer using drugs on duty at the Whitestone Pound?
No.
Other police officers were engaging in the use of drugs with you?
Yes.
Were you selling drugs when you were at the Whitestone Pound?
Yes.
To whom?
To cops.
Cops at the Whitestone Pound?
Yes.
Cops anywhere else?
Yes. Other precincts.
And were you selling narcotics to civilians as well at this time?
Yes.
Now, where were you receiving the drugs from that you were selling?
Well, I would go back into East New York during my lunch hour and come back to the pound.
Mr. Perez or people of that kind?
Yes. The same connections that I had in East New York.
So you were maintaining your relationship then with the drug traffickers of the 75th Precinct at that
Yes.
time. But Mr. Dowd, what value could you have been to people like Baron Perez and other drug traffickers when you were stuck in the Whitestone Pound? What information could you give them that might be of any value?
Well, there was little things you can give. You can give locations, because what happens is the vouchers come in with all the addresses on them if it's a drug dealer's car. If it was a big drug arrest, you have the drug dealer's name, address, phone number, date of birth, his wife's name, whatever's on there.
And you give that information to the drug traffickers in the 7-5.
Yes.
Hope maybe they could
Well,
take
if
advantage of that
If they take
information.
advantage of that, then I can maybe get a little piece back from that.
Mr. Dowd, I have to ask if you could speak up a little. It's becoming a little difficult to hear you. Could you just repeat what you said?
I would give him the information. If he was able to take advantage of it, he would give me some money in return.
At this point, Mr. Dowd, excluding your New York City paycheck, how much money were you making off the job?
You say off the job, it was really basically narcotics selling. About 1,000 a week, 1,500 a week.
And would that have been then from your activities at the Whitestone Pound and the sale of drugs to police officers and to civilians?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd, given the types of officers that you testified were at the Whitestone Pound, and given the acts of corruption that you said you all regularly engaged in, where were the supervisors?
They were there. They were there.
And what were they doing?
Well, some guys were making their schedules for their referee league. Some guys were doing tax returns. Other guys were locked in their office. Look, we did the job that was asked for us to do. These guys, you know, as long as we were doing the job, they let us go untamed.
They what?
They let us go untamed as long as we were getting the job done.
You consider what you were doing getting the job done?
Well, sir, the work at hand was simple, vouchering cars and putting them at their location at this time.
Was that equally true of the people who were supervisors in the 75th?
No, their task is much more difficult.
But they too didn't do anything about the activities that you were involved in.
I get no.
So in other words, as long as you were performing or producing the basic minimums that would be expected from you, you're saying that the supervisors would basically close their eyes to other acts of corruption that you might be committing?
That's one way of looking at it.
Mr. Dowd, you testified earlier that you were using drugs at the Whitestone Pound fairly regularly and at times openly. Did there come a time during this period where the department tried to test you for drugs?
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Well, when the date came up, I checked myself into a drug rehab, to an alcohol rehab.
Mr. Dowd, again, I want to urge you to please speak into the microphone.
When the date came up for the drug test, I checked myself into alcohol rehabilitation.
And did you tell them that you had a drug problem?
Yes.
And what did the counselor and the supervisor, who's an officer, tell you to do?
What happened was, he told me to go outside and make believe you were drunk. Drink something. And when you come in, tell the supervisor here that you were drinking all night and that you're back on the wagon.
So the supervisor advised you to go out and get drunk so that they could then have a reason for admitting you into the alcohol rehabilitation program.
That's correct.
Once again, asking you, showing you that a drug addiction was not a basis for getting help in the department.
That's correct.
Now, did you go to the alcohol rehabilitation program as a way of circumventing a drug test?
That's why I went.
And did the supervisor who instructed you to get drunk and then come back understand that he or she was helping you to accomplish that objective?
This one wasn't a supervisor. This was just another police officer who worked in the counseling unit.
What would have happened if you had, well, actually, what would have happened if you had taken the drug test at that time, Mr. Dowd? This would have been around 1988.
Well, the one in, which one?
I'm sorry?
Which one? There was several tests in 1988.
What would have happened if you
I
were
would have
told?
failed, that's for sure. That's why I went to the alcohol program.
You would have failed, and that.
Yes.
And what happens when an officer fails a Dole test?
They get fired.
And that was 4 years before your arrest?
Yes.
Do you know whether it's common for police officers to circumvent drug tests through these kind of schemes?
Yes.
Yes, it's common?
Yes, it's common.
Mr. Dowd, before we wrap up this segment, was there any other occasion at around this time when the department tried to test you for drug use?
Yes.
And were you once again able to circumvent the test?
Yes, I was.
Could you tell us how you did that?
Well, I was warned not to come back and ask for help by the counselors, because then they themselves admitted that they were enabling me.
Enabling you, you mean to continue your career of corruption on the job?
In combination with my abuse of alcohol and drugs. And because of that, I the fear of losing my job, I circumvented the test by strapping a mustard jar under my arm with a fish tank tube taped to my waist. And when I urinated, I squeezed the urine out of the tube.
Out of the mustard jar, you mean?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd, and so what was the result of that test?
Well, I lasted another 2, 3, 4 years.
So you passed the test?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd, what would have been the result of that test without the creative use of a mustard bottle?
I would have been fired. I would have failed the test and been fired.
Several years before your final arrest.
Yes.
In fact, Mr. Dowd, if you had been tested for drugs at any point during your last years in the 75th Precinct, and you had not been permitted to circumvent the drug test, what would the result have been?
It would have been a positive Dowd test, and I would have been fired.
But you were able to circumvent it each time, is that accurate?
Yes.
After the Whitestone Pound, you were assigned to the 94th Precinct in February of 1990, is that accurate?
Yes, February.
Before your question in that area, I have one final question. At this point, you've been in the department for approximately 8 years, is that accurate?
Yes.
You've committed hundreds of acts of corruption.
Yes.
Dozens of police officers and supervisors know just what you're up to when you report to work each day. Is that right?
That's correct.
You testified that you had a serious and a visible drug and alcohol problem. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at this time you said you're living a lavish lifestyle with little effort to conceal it. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd, my question is this. At this point in your career, were you surprised that you were still a New York City cop?
Shocked.
In fact, Mr. Dowd, in February of 1990, when you were transferred to the 94th Precinct, were you aware that there were 12 separate corruption allegations outstanding against you being conducted by the New York City Police Department?
No.
Were you aware during that time that you were under surveillance by investigators of the Field Internal Affairs Unit?
At times.
Did you see them at times?
Yes.
And despite all of these things which you just told Ms. Kornfeld, with regard to your career up to this point, you were in fact in February of 1990 restored to full duty, were you not?
Yes.
And once again assigned as a patrol officer in a Brooklyn precinct.
That's correct.
Where were you assigned, Mr. Dowd?
I was assigned to 94th Precinct.
What area of New York City does the 94th Precinct cover?
Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
Could you tell the commissioners what were the circumstances of your transfer?
Well, I had actually been transferred for 1 hour on paper back to the 75th Precinct. So when I found out an hour after that I was transferred to the 94th Precinct, it was pretty obvious they didn't want me in the high crime precinct any longer.
So in other words, given the fact that the investigations were failing, they were going to transfer you to a precinct where they thought you wouldn't have corruption opportunities.
That's the way it appeared.
But they were wrong, weren't they, Mr. Dowd?
That's true.
Mr. Dowd, when you arrived at the 94th Precinct, did you have a conversation with the commanding officer of that precinct?
Yes.
In sum and substance, can you tell the commissioners what...
I guess. And the beginning of 85, end of 84. And the individual, we got the call, we arrived.